Hi, this is Blake, and this is an introduction to the Tasking Manager 3. And this is what's new for people who do validation. So there was a what's new for mappers, which you should watch. This is going to dive right into the validation process because that's where some of the biggest changes have happened. So I'm going to click on this Contribute tab. That takes me to the list of projects. I should mention right off, you should go to your profile and do the edit, add contact details, and put in your email address. We're asking mappers to do that, so when you leave people feedback, it's going to get emailed to them instead of just showing up in the tasking manager. And this should make a huge difference. So when you leave feedback, it's much more likely people are going to get it. So you should go ahead and put your email address in there too. But I'm going to go to the contribute page, and I'm just going to click on, let's see here. I did not look for a good one before I started this, so let's go to this project here. One of the biggest differences between the Tasking Manager 2 and the Tasking Manager 3 is, so at the top of this, you can see the description of the project along with all of the details about it. And then you come down here and you have tabs like we had in the Tasking Manager 2, except there's two tabs, one for mapping, and the only thing I can do here is check out tasks for mapping. If I click on a task that needs to be validated or a task that's already been validated, I'm going to get a message that says this task is not in a state that allows mapping. And it means that it's already mapped. Or it's already been validated. So the map tab is only about doing mapping. And if you want to do validation, you need to click on the validation tab. And one of the reasons that we split these things up is because as a validator, you're now going to get a lot more information about this project and the people who mapped on it than you used to get. So you can see this is a list of all of the people who have mapped on this project and have tasks that are ready for validation. And this list will always only be of people with tasks for validation. So all of the people who have already had their tasks validated, they're not on this list, unless they also happen to have some that aren't validated. But if you look here, and it's not everybody who contributed, that's because some of the people have already had their tasks validated or invalidated, and so they wouldn't show up on this list. This list is only of tasks that are ready to be validated. You can do this exactly like you used to do it, basically exactly the same as the Tasking Manager 2. You can click on Validate a Random Task and it'll select a task for you, and you can say Start Validating. You can just click on a random task, or you can click on a task that you want to validate and say Start Validating, and this works exactly the same way as it did before. You would go through the validation process, and then this will say Stop Validating, and then you would either say Validate, mark as invalid, or you would say stop validating. This is exactly like it worked in the Tasking Manager 2. So there's no change there at all. The place where there's the big change is if I click off of a square here, is this list of information, is this list of all the people who did the mapping. And so what's nice about it is you used to be able to hover over somebody's name and you would see what tasks they had mapped. But now you can check out multiple tasks for validation at once. Again, you can still click on one, say Start Validating, it works exactly like it did. But now with this additional information, you can check out multiple tasks. And we'll get to this part in a second, but perhaps one of the easiest ways to do this is, we're trying to get these things validated and we're trying to get a good set of data. That's one of the main focuses of validation. Validation is also about coaching and encouraging and offering feedback and helping people map better, but part of it is also just to get things validated and get good data. So you could click on one on the map just like you could before. You can select a random task to validate, but you can also draw a polygon around an area and check out all the tasks that there are to validate in that area. And this is going to check out the only ones that are marked as done as well as ones that are marked already valid. So had this included this task square down here, it wouldn't get checked out because it's not ready for validation. But this lets you, draw a polygon around an area and then you say Start Validating, and it lets you personally check all of those out. So they are all checked out. And nobody else can work on them, and they're yours to work on the validation process. If you validate in the ID editor, then almost virtually nothing changes. So I can say start the ID editor, and the only thing that's going to be different is instead of seeing one task square that I need to validate, I'm going to see all the task squares that I have checked out that need validation. So it's going to be up to you how much you want to validate at once, but this lets you check out multiple task squares. This works exactly like it did, except now you get multiple task squares at once instead of just one at a time to validate. And there's no change here. You would do whatever your normal process was. When you were all done, you would come back to the tasking manager and you would mark valid or invalid, or you would stop validating. You can only mark as valid or invalid all of the task squares. There's no way to say, well, this one, this particular one I want to invalidate, and this particular one is valid. You can really only do it with all of them selected. And so I'm going to reselect the task that I have locked for validation, and then I'm going to either mark them all as valid or all as invalid. In the ID editor, it's kind of hard to see who did what, but if you feel like, oh, I need to invalidate this one, but the rest of these are fine, then you're just going to have to stop validating and then come back here and do them one at a time like you did before. So it's not going to be able to help you there. You can really only do this as a group to mark them all valid or invalid. So that's doing this by a polygon. The other way that you can do this is you can do it by user. So that's where this list in here comes in. And you can sort them by username. You can sort them by level. And so we are classifying users as beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And the concept here is you might, if you're trying to get a lot of validation done or you'd like to make a dent on this, you might sort by level and find all of the advanced users. Like this gentleman I know personally, he does excellent mapping. If I could select all of his task squares, I can look at them pretty quick, and my guess is they're all going to be just about right. And then I'm going to be able to come back here and mark all of his as validated. So there might be other advanced users that you recognize that the process is just going to go really fast. You could also sort by the number of task squares that the people have done. This column is when they registered for the tasking manager. So this is going to give you a sense of how new they are to the tasking manager. It's not how new they are to OSM mapping. That's going to be their level, which is based on OSM change sets. This is how new they are to hot mapping. So if you're doing validation and there's a mapathon going on and the people only registered an hour ago for the tasking manager, then you can have a pretty good sense that they're probably brand new and at that mapathon and working on this project as part of the mapathon. The other interesting bit of information you get is when is the last time they got validation. So if they registered 7 days ago and their last validation is 7 days ago, if these two match, it means that they've never had any validation. So you can see if we go down here, we might, we just did an import, so some of this data is not going to look, all this data is going to look a little weird. So we obviously did the import 7 days ago. Once the tasking manager is live and in use, this last validation column will start to look different. But primarily, if these two are the same, registered and last validated, it means they haven't gotten any validation. And so even if you sort this the other way, and you see this person has registered 4 years ago, they've been working on our projects for 4 years, you might see that they haven't had any validation for a long time. And so it would make sense to work on, validate some of their task squares and give them some feedback and say, hey, thanks, we really appreciate it. So hopefully with some experience, people will start using these columns to help identify brand new users, get them some validation as soon as possible. Experienced users that nobody has had a chance to, has done validation on their work lately, but make sure everybody's getting feedback, whether they're new or whether they're experienced, but we'll probably focus on new people a lot. So let's see how this works. This works very similar to drawing a polygon. It works real similar to drawing a polygon. So this person did those 3 task squares, and they're pretty close together. And this is the trickiest part about this. So these people are pretty close together. That's no big deal. That's almost the same as if I drew a polygon. So we're not going to do them. But let's look at these folks here. Okay, so this person here, Callie 3756. If I look at what they've done, if I hover over here, this is a perfect example. So you can see these people have done task squares spread quite. I'm going to click on Start, and it's going to go ahead and lock those for me. You know, I just checked out multiple task squares at once. And you can see, you know, these are pretty well spread out. And this is going to make a big difference in a second because we're going to open this up in JOSM, and this behaves quite differently in JOSM. So if I opened this up in ID, I would get all of these task squares, and I would have to pan around in ID and then zoom in so that the data loaded, and then I'd be able to check their mapping. So I could reselect these for validation to get them properly selected. And so I'm going to say Start Editor, except I'm going to use JOSM this time. And I'm going to say Start Editor. And I'm going to switch over to JOSM. And you can see, so it's loaded, let's look at what it loaded. It loaded 2 layers. One is the task boundaries layer. This task is also, or this layer rather, is also marked as not being able to be uploaded, so you can't accidentally upload this. And it says in the title, do not edit or upload. And that means don't do any editing on this layer because 1, you won't be able to because it's marked as don't upload. And 2, if you overrode the warning or changed the status on this, you would be uploading these squares that have nothing to do with OpenStreetMap. And then it creates a second data layer. And this data layer has nothing on it. It did not automatically download the data. And the reason that it doesn't automatically download the data is because you can imagine the way that, let's see here, let's see if I can get this right. The way that JOSM works is it can only download data in a bounding box. So it would send a bounding box for everything that's checked out, and it would essentially try to download all of the data for the entire project. And that's just not acceptable. It's going to time out. Even if they're close together, it could just be really miserable. So the only way that we could really make this work is we throw the task boundaries as a guide for you. And now what you're going to have to do is, let me get some imagery in here. And now what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to use, that's a gem. Yeah, that's a little conflict between JOSM and the video recording software I use. So great, that got cured. And you're going to have to zoom into these places and then download the data yourself and do the validation. You know, a little trick you can use is you could come in here. Again, this is kind of controlled by JOSM as to what these things look like, but people say, oh, it's too hard to see, you know, these bounding boxes. Note that I'm on the OSM data layer. People will say that, oh, it's too difficult for me to, depending on the imagery. This imagery is okay. They will say, oh, it's too hard for me to see the task squares that are my guide. So feel free to right-click on this and then say, interesting. I guess I cannot convert this to a GPX layer. Interesting. Okay. Well, maybe I'll have a tip for you on that one at a different time. Feel free to turn off the imagery if that helps you find it. I thought we could just change this to a GPX layer, but it looks like I can't. So you're going to have to figure out a way to work with that without making it into a GPX layer. But then you'll just have to come down in here and you'll have to, you know, this is what you would do. You would zoom into the area and you would download this data, and then you would do your validation on these two. And then you would zoom back out and you would find the next batch that you had to download the data for, and you would zoom in and you would download the data and you would do the validation on this. And, you know, you might very well find out that, you know, it's a similar situation as it was when we did it by drawing a polygon. When I get done, I can really only validate them all or invalidate them all. I can't really say this one's good and this one's bad, but this definitely gives you an opportunity to see all of the task squares that a particular user has marked as complete and let you validate on a user by user basis. And I understand it's a little bit different than what you're used to doing, but we're hoping that it's worth the trade-off, that now you have to deal with, you know, this extra layer, and you have to download the data yourself to be able to check out multiple task squares for a user and validate all of their mapping at once. I will tell you that on occasion, let's just turn this off. On occasion there's a bug in JOSM where you'll say load, you'll say open in JOSM and it won't focus on the task boundaries. We send it the command to say please focus on these task boundaries, but it just doesn't always listen for some reason. A quick workaround for that is to make this the active layer, and I do Control A to select all, and then I'll say zoom to one of these selections, and that will get me to where I need to be. So if you say switch to JOSM and you come in and it looks like this, make this the active layer, do a select all, Control A, and then zoom in, and that'll bring them all into the screen for you. Make sure you remember to switch back to this layer as your active editing layer, because we're not going to be able to upload any data from this layer. Maybe doing the select all helps you see these things better. Maybe that's a quick workaround for you if you're having a hard time seeing these, depending on what the imagery is like. But then, zoom in, do your data download, make sure it's on the actual editable layer, fix them up, do whatever you're going to do. Again, if you feel like some need to be validated and some don't, then you'll have to come back over to the tasking manager, and you'll have to, sort of say stop validating, come back down to the bottom and say stop validating, come back up to the top, reselect the tasks for validation, and then that lets me say stop mapping. This will say stop validating, and then come back and find the ones that user created and say some are valid and some are invalid. It's going to take some getting used to. It's going to take some working with it and giving us feedback on GitHub and whatever else we need to do so that we can make it a smoother process for you. But we're really hoping that being able to look at the users who have contributed in all of these different ways to help you identify who exactly it is that you want to validate, we hope it really makes it worth it. One other quick thing I'll mention is, you can switch the imagery so you can get a look at these. You can use imagery if you want to while you're doing your selection process. The other thing that's important to you as a validator is this questions and comments tab. These are project level questions and comments. So somebody might have a problem or they might ask a question. You should check. If you're an experienced person, which you should be if you're doing validation, check the questions and comments tab and see if people are asking questions or see if people are leaving comments. If you have a question or a comment, you can put it in here and say add a message. Clicking on contact a project manager will direct it at the project manager before you leave your message. So this is also an avenue for you, but you should also check it to see if you can be answering questions or giving people feedback or helping somebody understand something. Similar, so this is at the project level. This might change. This might turn into Get Help, by the way, but at the moment it's questions and comments. But you as a validator are an experienced mapper and you're dedicated to making sure that mappers get feedback and get their questions answered. This is a place to do that. There's one other place that you should pay attention to as a validator, and that's this Activity and Stats tab. If you click on the Activity and Stats tab, if you click on the Activity and Stats tab, you will see this says comments by users. These are all of the comments that are left on the individual task squares. So you should come and review this as well and see if people are asking questions or have problems. You can then click on that particular task and it will take you right to it. Some of these are, these are not questions. Many buildings, all very close together. I guess they do have a question. Maybe better to map the buildings as only a group of buildings. That's a good question. I don't know. You could go to that task and you could take a look and you could answer that question for them. How could you tell that they were stone memorials? I don't know who that's. Oh, I see. It's directed to this person. So if people are asking questions, you should come here and review this as well to see what people are talking about on the projects, what sort of questions they're asking, what sort of feedback is getting left, and that sort of a thing. So again, and then to return to the project, you click on the project title, and it'll take you back to the project. So questions and comments, project level, not attached to a particular task, activity and stats, every single comment that's been left on a task for the whole project. So that's another place for you to look so that you can review where people are having issues. So that's about it. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to, especially if you're going to be checking out based on user. Whoops, especially if you're going to be, let's see, get my validate tab, especially if you're going to be checking out task squares based on user. It's going to take some experience and it's going to take some practice to figure out what works best for you, but we hope it makes a big difference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.